Been a while, but my daughter wanted me to do some more of these short stories. She said write some more, but I've already got loads written. I just had to find them. And then I'm wearing my glasses as well because I'm getting old. This one's called, is it Back to Front? That ain't called that, but is that Back to Front? Have Faith. Alright, here we go. It's called Have Faith, by the way. I just said that. Shawn was a young man of 19. He had so far had a much standard life, really. Excuse the budgies that keep flying around. He had a strong family unit and a few good friends. He had recently lost his last grandparent, Grandpa Joe. Joe was his dad's father, and Shawn had been very upset with the death, especially when he witnessed his dad collapse in grief at the funeral. This had been the first time that he had seen his dad cry, and this first time his dad was sobbing like a small child. Shawn's mother cradling him and stroking his hair, trying to give the man some kind of comfort. The funeral was 3 weeks ago now, but the family was still very much struggling with the loss. Shawn walked into the living room. His dad was staring at the television. He knew his dad wasn't concentrating on the programme, because it was the X Factor. His dad despised the programme. "Do you want a coffee, Dad?" he asked. "You what, son?" he replied. "A coffee. Would you like the coffee, Dad?" He repeated. "No thanks, I'm okay," he answered. Shawn left the room. He had found it difficult these last few weeks communicating with his dad. He entered the kitchen. "He just needs more time, dear," his mum said, as she prepared the dinner. "Why do we have funerals and churches? None of us believe in that crap," he asked. "Why can't we just have them in a purpose-built warehouse or something?" "How would that look, Shawn? It wouldn't have the same respect. It would be too institutional." "Oh, it's just silly. How can there be a God? We have far too much knowledge these days to believe in such rubbish," he grumbled. Shawn was angry. He felt pain that he had no way of numbing, and he wanted the answers that mankind have wanted for thousands of years. After dinner, Shawn went out for a cycle ride to get some air. After a few miles, he caught sight of a church. He locked up his bike and opened a large door. He walked up the aisle and looked around. He had to admit to himself the building did have some kind of awe to it, and he caught himself sitting on a pew praying. "Oh God, why can't you be real? It's so unfair. The world is a horrible place. There is too much pain and suffering. I'm finding it so hard. My dad is falling apart and I can't help." Shawn was crying. He heard the door open and close behind him. He wiped his eyes and he cleared his throat. "It's okay to cry, young man." A beautiful-looking nun stood before him. She offered him a handkerchief. He used it and stared into her eyes. Her eyes were like dark chocolate pools, hypnotic to look at. He felt his body relax and a warm glow filled his being. She smiled, put her hands on him, and she looked up at the large crucifix at the end of the church. "Please bless this poor soul. Ease his pain, Lord." An intense feeling overwhelmed him. He felt pins and needles all over his body. And again he cried. But these tears were different. These were tears of ecstasy. "Go home to your loved ones," she said, and she walked away. Shawn found it hard to stand. He had to steady himself as he rose. For a moment he wondered if he had died and was now living in heaven. His body felt so light and de-stressed. He left the church, unlocked his bike, and he began to cycle home. As he rode along, he heard a screech of brakes and a thud. He stopped to look around. A van sped off and the driver yelled from the window, "Keep your fucking dog off on a lead." An old lady crouched over her pet. She was sobbing as she scooped it into her arms. Shawn walked over to help. "I saw everything. He just drove off," he said. "Oh, I don't care. What about Henry? He's dead." Shawn held out his hands and pushed the dog's ear out of its face. A small bead of blood ran from its still eyeball. He stroked the animal's face a few times as he comforted the lady. The lady jumped. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Look," she said. As she looked down at her pet, life had returned to the dog's eyes. Its belly raised and fell. The animal was alive. "It must have just been knocked out," he said. The woman just stared at him, and she crossed her chest. Shawn got on his bike and left. He arrived home and threw his bike down on the front lawn. He went inside. His mum and dad were watching television. Shawn sat down too and said something odd just happened to me. and he continued to relate the story to them. His dad remained in a coma-like state, but his mum said, "That is a little strange, dear, but I'm sure the poor creature must have just been knocked out." "Yeah," he replied, and went upstairs. He laid on his bed and put headphones on and listened to some music before falling into a deep sleep. He was awoken by his phone. He had a text from Louise, his pal from work. "You okay, Shawn?" the text read. "Yeah, I'm alright," he replied, and they arranged to meet for breakfast at the cafe the next day. The next morning, as he arrived, he saw his friend in the queue. He waved through the window, and she returned the gesture. "Hello, you," she said, and he pulled his wallet from his pocket. "No, don't worry, I have a voucher," she said. 2 for 1 breakfast, it read. She ordered the meals. They sat by the window, and Shawn asked, "Do you believe in God?" "Fuck off. No way. What twat." "I kind of think maybe our spirit might leave our bodies and probably goes into someone else." "What, a bit like reincarnation?" "Yeah, kind of. Why do you ask?" "Is it because you lost your granddad?" "Yeah, I don't know. There must be a reason for all this. Why the fuck do we exist? All we do is live and then we just die. What's the point?" "Wow, this is very deep for you. I don't know how to talk to you when you're like this. You're normally prating about and being a prat." He went quiet for the length of his meal. "You alright?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm fine, but I want to do something, but I'm afraid you will think I've lost the plot." "Do what?" she asked. "I want to dig up my fucking granddad. I think I can resurrect him." Normally she would have laughed at this, but not today. Shawn was in a low place, a place she had never seen him. "Okay, and when do you propose to do this?" He looked at her, he held her hand, and he said, "Tonight, as soon as it's dark." That night, Shawn was dressing himself in the darkest clothes he could find. He knew digging up bodies wasn't exactly legal and didn't want to be caught. Louise rang the doorbell, and Shawn soon opened the door. "Christ, you going to a funeral?" she asked. "Ha! Not funny," he replied. And they got into his van and set off. As they pulled up at the graveyard, Louise said, "My God, this is like an old Hammer horror film." "Yeah, except this is real. Real fucking life," he replied. He took his digging spade from the back of his van. Louise had a torch and they entered the churchyard. The gate creaked. "What did I say? Hammer horror." He grinned but was totally focused on what he was about to do. "Hey, shine your torch on that gravestone." Louise spun round and the torch lit shone on the stone. It read, "Here rests the body of Grandpa Joe, a dear man who was everyone's friend." Shawn read the rest of it into his head. "This is it, Louise. This is it." "I can't fucking do this," she replied. "It's fine. You just hold the torch and I'll do everything." She reluctantly followed her instructions. Shawn was a builder's labourer, so digging was no problem. He was down to the wooden coffin within 30 minutes. The shovel made contact with the wood, making a hollow thud. Thud. He paused, realising how close he had become to exposing his beloved granddad. He lowered himself down and stood upon the wooden casket, gazing down. "Hey, if you want to go now, I'll understand," he said softly. "No, of course not. I'm here for you. You know I am." "Pass me that crowbar, please," he asked. She handed it to him, and he forced it under the lid of the coffin. He pushed down, and one corner popped open. He smelt a pungent aroma from the gap, and paused momentarily before continuing. After prising all sides, he pulled the lid off. Inside laid his dead granddad, eyes sunken into their orbits, and receding gums made the teeth stand out. Shawn gasped, "Grandpa Joe, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. What am I doing?" He began to sob into his soiled hands. "It's okay, Shawn. Do your stuff. Bring him back. Bring him back," Louis shouted. Shawn composed himself, wiped his hands on his trousers to clean them off. "Here goes nothing." And he placed his hands on his granddad's shoulders and whispered, "Come back, Grandpa Joe. Come back." Nothing. Shawn looked at Louise, and she stared back at him. "Have we left it too long, do you think?" she asked. "I don't know. I suppose so. Stupid idea of mine anyway," he moaned. Suddenly a creepy sigh came from the body. and the eyes rolled in Shawn's direction. Shawn stood up fast in a panic. The body began to sit up. Shawn stood with his feet either side of Grandpa Joe and couldn't speak. His beloved granddad was alive, but he looked hideous and appeared to be in pain. The body was clasping its chest and screaming, "Ah!" Its flesh grey and maggots falling from its mouth and ears. "Shawn, what did your granddad die of?" Louise cried. "A heart attack," he replied. The resurrection had worked, but the body had been brought back with an unhealthy heart, and it was now going through the horrendous act of a constant heart attack. "No!" Shawn screamed, picked up the spade and swung it at the hideous vision before him. It sliced into its neck, partially severing the head from the body. It screamed more, and Shawn swung again. This time the head fell into the grave beside and slumped back into its coffin. Shawn scrambled from the grave and began backfilling with all his might. He levelled off the soil and stamped it down. "Fuck my healing hands! Never again am I touching anything dying, injured or in pain, ever again." Short end, I do know. And not a bad little story. It's been a long time since I read that.